My husband told me to apologize to his female best friend, because my honesty hurt her feelings. When I refused, he yelled, "Apologize or I'll divorce you." I finally agreed. I went to her house, looked her straight in the eyes, and in front of her husband, I said something that made them both realize why women like me never bend when it comes to the truth. Imagine, if you will, my husband of 5 years, Mason, standing in our living room, arms crossed, demanding I apologize to his best friend, Scarlett, or he'd divorce me. He delivered that ultimatum with the cold detachment of a business deal, utterly clueless that he was handing me the perfect, devastating weapon. For months I'd watched him transform. This man I'd promised to love. The Mason I thought I married wouldn't gaslight me into believing I was the problem. Not when his emotional affair with Scarlett had been blooming right under my nose for years. Now, facing his demand, my voice came out calmer than I felt. "You want me to apologize to her? For what exactly?" His voice stung, rising with each accusation. "For treating her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. For making her feel unwelcome in our lives. For being so jealous you can't accept I have a meaningful friendship outside our marriage." He truly acted like he was the victim. "Scarlett's been nothing but kind to you, and you've hurt her feelings. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." Something inside me snapped in that moment. Not heartbreak, not yet. What I felt was clarity. Cold. Sharp. Like a blade. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. I'm Arya Montgomery, and for 5 years, I genuinely believed I had a rock-solid marriage. We met at a summer barbecue. One of those perfect July afternoons where everything feels possible. Mason looked at me with a genuine smile that day, and we talked for 3 hours straight. He listened to me, truly saw me unlike anyone before. Our wedding came 2 years later, small, meaningful, with string lights and wildflowers. Mason cried during his vows. My mother said she'd never seen me happier. We built a life together. Our 2-bedroom apartment, shared dinners, talk of a house, kids, travel. Life felt stable, predictable, comfortable. I thought I knew exactly who I'd married. Looking back, I was living in a carefully constructed illusion. The cracks started appearing about 6 months into our marriage. Mason came home, practically vibrating with excitement. His college best friend Scarlett was moving back to town. He described her with a nostalgic warmth that initially seemed innocent. Scarlett was brilliant, he'd said. Charismatic. His closest friend in college. I was genuinely happy for him. Everyone needs good friends, right? I thought it would be good for him to reconnect. When I finally met Scarlett at a dinner Mason organized, she was exactly as he described. Polished, confident, professionally attractive. But what struck me was how easily she and Mason fell into their old rhythm. They laughed about professors I didn't know, reminisced about road trips I hadn't been on, finished each other's sentences. I sat there smiling, nodding, but mostly feeling like an observer. Like I was watching a reunion I wasn't part of. It wasn't hostile, just exclusive. Their shared history created a language I didn't speak. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there too. Quiet. An accountant. He caught my eye at one point, while Mason and Scarlett were lost in an inside joke, and we shared a brief look. I didn't understand it then, but I would later recognize it as a mutual acknowledgement of our secondary status. The first small boundary violation happened so subtly. Scarlett started texting Mason during our date nights. We'd be at the movies, his phone would buzz. He'd glance at it, type a quick response, put it away. 5 minutes later, buzz. Then again. By the time the movie started, he'd exchanged a dozen messages with Scarlett. He'd apologize, promised to put it away, but it kept pulling his attention like a magnetic force. This became a pattern. Dinner dates interrupted, weekends disrupted, late evenings spent typing responses to her messages while we supposedly watched TV. Each time I gently suggested he could text her back later, he'd look at me with barely concealed disappointment, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Then came the spare key incident. He gave Scarlett a key to our apartment for emergencies, without discussing it with me. I found out when I came out of my office one Tuesday afternoon to find Scarlett on my couch, shoes off, completely at home, while Mason made her coffee. Needed our Wi-Fi, she explained cheerfully. I stood in my own living room feeling like an intruder. When she finally left, I gently suggested we establish some boundaries. Mason's response was immediate, defensive. Scarlett's going through a difficult transition, he explained, exaggeratedly patient. New city, struggling marriage, high-pressure job. Real friends show up for each other. Are you really going to be the kind of person who puts convenience over compassion? That conversation became the template. Every time I tried to establish a boundary, Mason reframed it as me being unwelcoming, jealous, unable to handle his friendships. I started second-guessing myself. Maybe I was possessive. Maybe this was what mature adult friendships looked like and I was just too insecure. Our 5th anniversary arrived. I'd made reservations at an elegant restaurant, planned the evening meticulously. Dinner, a walk along the river, a leather-bound photo album I'd commissioned for him. We made it halfway through appetizers before Mason's phone started buzzing. Incessantly. 1, 2, 5 times. Each notification fractured his attention, until he was barely present, his eyes glued to the screen. That's when I said, "Mason, it's our anniversary." He looked up, genuinely confused. "Scarlett's having a crisis," he said. "I'm just letting her know she's not alone." But I was alone, sitting across from my husband at an expensive restaurant, on what should have been one of our most important nights, while he provided emotional support to another woman. The irony was suffocating. That night, lying in bed while Mason slept peacefully beside me, I finally admitted it to myself. My marriage had 3 people in it, and I was the least important one. 3 months passed. 3 months of trying to convince myself I was overreacting, of swallowing my instincts, forcing smiles while Scarlett used her spare key, and Mason prioritized her texts. Then my laptop died. On a Wednesday morning mid-project, the screen went black. Deadline was end of day. Panic set in. I needed access to my files and fast. Mason's laptop was on his desk. He'd told me dozens of times I could use it, that we had no secrets. I grabbed it without hesitation. I powered it up, logged into my cloud storage. While working, I realized I needed our tax documents from last year. Mason handled all our administrative paperwork, kept everything organized on his laptop. I opened his file explorer, navigated to our shared documents. That's when I saw it, buried among work files, in a way that suggested it was deliberately hidden, but not well enough. A folder labeled personal and private. Something about those 2 words together made my stomach clench. Mason and I didn't keep secrets, so why would he need a private folder? My hands trembled. Part of me knew I should stop, ask him later. Part of me desperately hoped for something innocent, birthday planning, sensitive work documents. Clicked it open. Hundreds of files, photos, screenshots, documents spanning 3 years. My eyes tried to make sense of it. Mason and Scarlett, at restaurant tables I didn't recognize, leaning in close, looking far more intimate than casual friends. Candid shots of Scarlett, glowing with genuine joy. Selfies of the 2 of them, his arm around her, both smiling like they shared something precious and private. Then the screenshots. Dozens of text message conversations. I clicked the first one. 2 a.m. 6 months ago. Scarlett, a long paragraph about feeling lost in her marriage to Elijah, missing the connection she used to feel. Mason's equally long response, validating every feeling, sharing his own thoughts about paths not taken, connections that transcend normal friendship boundaries. Another screenshot a year ago, late at night again. Scarlett, unable to sleep, thinking about different versions of her life. Mason responding with understanding, his own confessions about wondering what if, having regrets he couldn't fully articulate to most people. My client deadline was completely forgotten. I sat frozen, clicking through screenshot after screenshot, watching a hidden relationship unfold in agonizing detail. These weren't casual check-ins. These were emotional confessions, intimate late-night conversations where 2 people shared their deepest feelings and longings. Then I found the message that would replay in my mind for months, burned into my memory with the precision of acid. Scarlett at 2:17 a.m., 8 months ago. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that? Mason's response just 3 minutes later, suggesting he'd been awake waiting for her. More than I probably should, but we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now. I read those words 5 times, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But the meaning was crystal clear. My husband had feelings for Scarlett that went far beyond friendship. He thought about alternative versions of his life where they were together. And he valued what they currently had, whatever that was, enough to maintain it through years of secret communication. The worst part? 2:20 a.m. While I was sleeping next to him. I couldn't stop. Pandora's box was open. I closed the screenshots and opened our joint credit card statements. Riverbend Cafe. Every Tuesday afternoon. For the past 2 years. Consistent charges, $50 to $70. The kind of total for 2 people having a nice lunch. Then Mason's digital calendar. Lunch meeting. Every Tuesday. No other details. These lunch meetings matched the dates of the photos. While I was at home eating leftovers, he was having weekly secret dates with Scarlett. This wasn't occasional friendly catch-ups. This was deliberate, Sustained, carefully planned deception. Mason had been building a parallel emotional life with Scarlett. Standing dates. Intimate late-night conversations. Shared secrets. All while coming home to me, acting like everything was normal. I sat at that desk for 2 hours, my client presentation forgotten. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. This was years of documented emotional intimacy. Financial proof. Photographic evidence of a relationship that crossed every boundary. What made it worse was the sudden, horrifying clarity about how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Every single time I'd expressed discomfort about Scarlett, Mason had made me the problem. Jealous. Possessive. Insecure. He'd gaslit me into thinking my instincts were wrong, that I was the one who needed to work through my issues. But my instincts had been screaming the truth the entire time. Every uncomfortable feeling? Accurate. I finally understood. Mason wasn't defending Scarlett because she was just his friend. He was defending her because, in his mind, she was his priority. I was the obligation, the legal wife he came home to out of commitment, not choice. Scarlett was the person he thought about at 2 a.m. I had become the third wheel in my own marriage. I sat there until the afternoon light faded. My client deadline had passed hours ago. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. None of it mattered. Eventually I moved. Found a USB drive. Methodically copied everything. Every photo. Every screenshot. Every credit card statement. I organized it all, building a case like a lawyer preparing for trial. When I finished, I waited for tears, for rage, for an emotional collapse. Instead, I felt a strange calm. Clarity. Almost relief. Knowing I hadn't been crazy. My instincts had been right. The clock read 3:45. Mason would be home around 6:30. I decided to give him exactly that, normal. I went to the kitchen. Started dinner, chicken with roasted vegetables, one of his favorites. Set the table. Put on our playlist. Created an illusion of normalcy in an apartment that suddenly felt like a stage set. Mason walked in at 6:02. Tired. He smiled when he saw me, kissed my cheek. "Something smells good," he said, heading to change. "Rough day with that client presentation." "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady. I let him decompress for 15 minutes. Long enough for him to pour himself wine, settle on the couch, pull out his phone. I watched him scroll, probably texting Scarlett, completely oblivious. Then I walked over. His laptop, already open to that hidden folder, with its hundreds of incriminating files. I sat down in the armchair across from him, the coffee table between us like a barrier. I turned the screen so he could see it clearly. "What is this, Mason?" He looked up from his phone. Confusion. Then recognition. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For 3 seconds, raw panic flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder, defensiveness. "You went through my private files?" His voice rose with indignation. "Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right to go snooping through my laptop." The audacity stunned me. He wasn't denying what was in the folder. He wasn't apologizing. His first instinct was to make me the villain. "I was using your laptop because mine crashed during a work deadline," I said, my voice calm. "I needed tax documents. I found a folder labeled private that contained evidence of a years-long emotional affair with Scarlett. So yes, I looked. Now I'm asking you to explain it." He set down his wine glass with a thud. "There's nothing to explain. You're misinterpreting a friendship because you've never been able to handle me being close with Scarlett. This is exactly the kind of jealous behavior I've been trying to be patient with for months." A cold certainty settled in my chest. He was actually going to try to gaslight me, even with the evidence sitting right there. "Mason," I said, "I read the text messages. I saw the photos from your secret Tuesday lunch dates. I found the credit card charges at Riverbend Cafe every single week for 2 years. This isn't me misinterpreting friendship. This is you having an emotional affair and lying about it." "It's not an affair." He stood up, pacing. "Scarlett and I are close friends. Yes, we talk about deep things. Yes, we meet for lunch. That's what real friendship looks like, Arya. Deep connection, emotional honesty, mutual support. Just because you don't have friendships like that doesn't mean they're inappropriate." Every sentence was a deflection, reframing his betrayal as my inadequacy. "She texted you at 2 in the morning asking if you ever thought about what life would have been like if you'd gotten together instead of staying friends," I said, my voice harder now. "You responded that you thought about it more than you probably should. That's not friendship, Mason. That's emotional infidelity." He stopped pacing, facing me directly. "You're twisting things. taking private conversations out of context and building some narrative in your head because you're insecure about my friendships. Scarlett and I talk about hypothetical scenarios sometimes. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. The argument raged for 2 hours. He had an explanation for everything. The late-night texts were just friends supporting each other. The secret lunches were regular catch-ups. He didn't mention because he knew I'd react badly. Every time I pointed out how he'd crossed boundaries, he countered that I was the one with the problem. I was too jealous, too possessive, too insecure. I was exhausted. My head ached from his circular logic, his constant deflection. But I kept pushing. I needed him to acknowledge the truth, to stop lying, to take responsibility. That's when Mason delivered the statement that sealed the fate of our marriage. He stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, jaw set. His voice took on that patronizing tone, the one that suggested he was the adult dealing with a difficult child. If anything, Arya, you owe Scarlett an apology. The words hung in the air. I stared at him, genuinely shocked into silence. She has been nothing but kind to you over the years, he continued, warming to his argument. She's tried to include you, tried to be friendly, and you've treated her with suspicion and coldness. She knows you don't like her. She's told me it hurts her feelings how you act, how you always try to limit our friendship. He was actually doing this, trying to make his emotional affair partner into the victim, and me into the aggressor who needed to apologize. You want me to apologize to her? I heard my own voice, oddly calm despite the rage building inside. For what exactly? For noticing that my husband was having an emotional affair? For being uncomfortable with inappropriate boundaries? For trusting my instincts when you've spent months trying to convince me they were wrong? For being jealous and possessive and unable to handle me having close friendships? Mason's voice rose with each word. For making Scarlett feel unwelcome and judged when she's done nothing wrong. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I seriously need to reconsider this marriage. The room went absolutely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade. Mason stood there, arms crossed, his expression set, clearly believing he held all the power. He thought he was calling my bluff, forcing me to choose between my pride and my marriage. He had no idea what he'd just done. Something shifted inside me in that silence. Cold, clear, absolutely certain. I looked at my husband, this man who was demanding I apologize to his emotional affair partner for the crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship, and realized he just handed me the perfect weapon. If Mason wanted an apology, he would get one. Just not the kind he was expecting. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke, my voice much calmer than I felt. Fine. Mason's expression shifted to surprise. He clearly expected more argument. I'll apologize to Scarlett, I continued, my tone completely reasonable. But let's do it properly. At her house. With Elijah there too. If I'm going to apologize for hurting her feelings, I want to do it right. In front of both of our spouses. So everyone can hear what I have to say. Mason's face lit up with relief. Triumph. He actually smiled. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully broken me. Really? You'll do that? His voice was eager, pleased with himself. Absolutely, I said. Schedule it for this Saturday evening. I want to make sure everyone's there. I'll prepare what I want to say. He nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his phone to text Scarlett. I watched him type, watched his face relax for the first time all evening, and felt absolutely nothing but cold clarity. He had no idea what I was actually planning. No comprehension that he just arranged the perfect stage for me to detonate the truth in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Mason spent the rest of the evening texting Scarlett, his face glowing with satisfaction. I watched him from across the room. This man who believed he just won a significant victory, and felt nothing but cold determination settling deeper into my bones. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up with absolute clarity. Mason left for work, kissing my forehead, reminding me to think about my apology. The moment his car pulled out, I returned to his laptop. I spent 3 hours methodically documenting everything. Detailed screenshots of every damaging conversation, organized chronologically. The early messages friendly enough, but they gradually shifted, crossing boundaries in increments so small maybe Mason convinced himself each step was innocent. By the second year, Scarlett was texting him late at night about feeling disconnected from Elijah, about missing emotional intimacy. Mason, responding with paragraphs, validating every feeling. They started using pet names. You always know exactly what I need to hear. I don't know what I'd do without you. I organized it all into folders by year and month. A timeline. Impossible to dismiss. Then the financial evidence. Our joint credit card statements. Every Tuesday lunch charge at Riverbend Cafe. Highlighted. Over $7,000 spent on secret meals with another woman, while we were supposedly saving for a house down payment. Then, something that made my stomach churn in a different way. Buried in Mason's email inbox. Receipts for gifts he'd purchased for Scarlett. A designer silk scarf, $250. An expensive bottle of French wine, $180. Flowers delivered to her office, $75, with a card that read, "Always knew you could do it. So proud of you." These weren't casual friend gestures. These were the kinds of gifts you bought for someone you were romantically involved with. The card messages? Affectionate in a way that crossed every platonic boundary. I printed everything. Created digital backups in 3 separate cloud storage accounts that Mason didn't have access to. Saved copies to 2 different USB drives, hidden in separate locations. I wasn't taking any chances. By Thursday afternoon, I had built an airtight case. But I still had one more thing to do. Something that required a courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I needed to call Elijah Pierce. I sat at our kitchen table staring at my phone for 10 minutes. I'd spoken directly to Elijah fewer than a dozen times. Quiet, reserved, he observed more than he participated. But I'd seen something in his eyes at those gatherings, especially recently. A kind of resigned awareness, as if he knew more than he was saying. The same look I'd probably been wearing myself. My finger hovered over the call button. Was this going too far? But another part of me, the part that had been gaslit for months, knew Elijah deserved a warning. He deserved to know his world was about to change. I pressed call. "This is Elijah." His voice professional, slightly puzzled. "Hi, Elijah. It's Arya Montgomery, Mason's wife." I kept my voice steady. A brief pause. "Arya, is everything okay? I'm calling because Mason has arranged for me to come to your house on Saturday evening to apologize to Scarlett. He insisted the apology happened in front of both of you, and I wanted to make sure you'd be home for it." Another pause. Longer. I could almost hear him processing the layers. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. More alert. Focused. "I'll be there." No questions about what the apology was for. No confusion why I was calling him directly. Just immediate understanding. "Thank you," I said quietly. Then, because I needed him to understand what was really happening, I added, "I think there are some things you should know. Things that have been going on that you might have suspected, but didn't have proof of." The silence on the other end was heavy with recognition. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for calling me." 5 words, carrying the weight of years of suspicion, of being told he was paranoid, of watching his wife's attention directed elsewhere, while being made to feel like the problem. "You deserve to know the truth," I said. "We both do." "I'll be there Saturday," he repeated. "And Arya, whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it." We hung up without another word. I sat there, feeling the weight of what I had just set in motion. Elijah knew. He'd be prepared. Meanwhile, Mason came home that evening in an excellent mood. He'd had lunch with Scarlett that day. Their regular Tuesday lunch shifted to Thursday. He talked enthusiastically about how grateful Scarlett was that I'd agreed to apologize, how this would strengthen all of our relationships. I nodded and smiled, internally reviewing my compiled evidence. Friday was more of the same. Mason coached me repeatedly on what to say during the apology. He'd written out bullet points on his phone. Acknowledge my jealousy. Admit I'd misinterpreted their friendship. Thank Scarlett for her patience. Express gratitude. He even suggested I bring an expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering. Really show her you're serious about making amends, he said earnestly. I agreed to everything. I practiced the humble facial expressions. I asked clarifying questions about tone and body language, making him think I was genuinely preparing to deliver the apology he'd scripted. With each coaching session, his confidence grew. He'd successfully trained his wife to perform public submission. Friday evening, he actually hugged me. I'm proud of you for being mature enough to work through your issues. I hugged him back, feeling the unfamiliar weight of deliberate deception. That night, I lay in bed next to Mason, listening to him breathe peacefully, completely unaware that tomorrow would detonate his carefully constructed world. Sleep wouldn't come. Was I becoming vindictive? Was public humiliation the answer? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Mason's face, illuminated by his phone at our anniversary dinner, his disappointed looks when I set boundaries, the patient, patronizing tone, the way he made me question my sanity while maintaining a hidden emotional affair that proved I'd been right all along. I thought about all the women who stay silent, who apologize for being right, who shoulder blame for other people's betrayals. And I realized what I was planning wasn't petty revenge. It was justice, clarity, truth-telling that shatters comfortable lies. When dawn finally broke, painting the walls with pale gold light, I got up with absolute certainty. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready. Saturday arrived, clear skies. I spent the morning moving through our apartment like someone preparing for battle. Mason interpreted my quiet focus as nervousness. He kept reassuring me. Everything will be fine. I let him believe whatever he needed to believe. By 5 p.m., I was dressed in a simple navy dress. Mason had picked out the expensive wine, wrapped it carefully. We left at 6:15 for the 25-minute drive. He insisted we take his car, presenting a united front. He drove, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally patting my knee. He talked the entire drive about how meaningful this was, how proud he was, how our marriage would be so much stronger. I watched suburban streets slide past. Brick townhouses, small yards, families enjoying the warm evening. Everything looked so normal. People walking dogs, kids riding bikes. None of them had any idea that in one of those similar-looking houses, four lives were about to detonate. Mason kept glancing at me, hopeful, nervous. He wondered if I'd back out. I gave him nothing. My expression remained neutral. I held the wine back. I nodded when he talked. I smiled when he squeezed my knee. I was the picture of a contrite wife. When we pulled up to Scarlett and Elijah's house at 6:40, all the interior lights blazed. Through the window, I saw Scarlett arranging something on their coffee table. Even from the car, I could tell she'd gone to effort, setting the stage for what she believed would be her validation and my public submission. Mason parked, turned off the engine, sat for a moment. Then he turned to me with such genuine emotion. I almost felt sorry for him. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but this means everything to me, Arya. Everything. Our marriage is going to be so much stronger after tonight. You'll see." I looked at him. This man who had gaslit me for months, who had maintained an emotional affair, who had demanded I apologize to his affair partner, who genuinely believed this evening would strengthen our marriage by cementing another woman's priority in his life. "I know it will," I said and squeezed his hand back. That was the last moment Mason would look at me with trust or affection. He just didn't know it yet. We walked up to the front door. Mason carried the wine. Scarlett opened it before the chime finished, her smile wide, barely concealing her smugness. She looked perfect, of course. Designer jeans, silk blouse, professionally styled hair, flawless makeup. She'd clearly dressed for this, expecting to be photographed for a lifestyle magazine on Gracious Living. "Mason, Arya, come in." Her voice was warm, welcoming, playing the gracious host. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Really, clearing the air will be good for all of us." Mason handed her the wine. She made appreciative noises, but set it aside without much genuine interest. She was focused on me, gauging how thoroughly Mason had broken me. Elijah appeared from the kitchen. The moment our eyes met, I saw everything I needed to know. He was alert, watchful, braced for impact. His expression had none of the resigned exhaustion I'd seen before. He knew something significant was about to happen. And unlike Mason and Scarlett, he was prepared for it to be uncomfortable. "Arya, Mason." He nodded to both of us, his voice neutral. Then his eyes found mine again, for a fraction of a second. Acknowledgement, recognition, maybe even gratitude. We moved into their living room, according to some unspoken choreography. Scarlett and Elijah settled onto their gray sectional. Mason and I took matching armchairs across from them. A glass coffee table created a barrier. On it, wine glasses, a carefully arranged cheese board, small plates. Scarlett had clearly spent time staging the scene. The room itself felt theatrical, like we were all actors who'd been given scripts. Except only I knew what the real plot was about to be. Mason settled into his chair, gave me an encouraging nod. His expression radiated excitement mixed with relief. He thought he'd won. Scarlett folded her hands in her lap, gracious expectation. Her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged into magnanimous forgiveness. She was ready to receive my contrition. Elijah leaned back, arms crossed loosely, watching everything with focused intensity. He was the only person in that room besides me who understood that something was about to shift. I took a deliberate breath, set down my wine glass on the coffee table. The sound of glass meeting what seemed unnaturally loud. I looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze, and began speaking in a voice that was calm, measured, and gave nothing away. "Scarlett, I want to start by saying that Mason was absolutely right." I paused, letting those words settle, watching her smile widen with validation. "I do owe you an apology." Another pause. Scarlett relaxed fractionally. Mason's face lit up. Elijah's expression didn't change at all, but his eyes sharpened. But not for the reasons you think. The atmosphere shifted so dramatically, I could almost feel the air pressure change. Mason's encouraging smile faltered, freezing on his face. Scarlett's expression transformed from gracious acceptance to cautious uncertainty. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his full attention locked on me, every muscle in his body alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice. Not raising my volume. Not changing my tone. Just speaking truth with the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up years ago. I apologize for allowing you and Mason to continue an emotional affair right under my nose while convincing myself I was the crazy one for feeling uncomfortable. Mason tried to interrupt, his voice sharp with warning. Arya, what are you? I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence without even looking at him. My eyes stayed locked on Scarlett's face, watching her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. Let me finish. You demanded an apology. I'm giving you one. I turned my attention to Elijah, whose face had gone completely still. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady despite everything. Opened the folder I'd so carefully organized. I apologized to Elijah actually, because he deserved to know the truth about his wife long before tonight. For the past 3 years, Mason and Scarlett have been meeting every Tuesday for secret lunch dates at Riverbend Cafe. They've been having late-night text conversations about alternative life choices they wish they'd made together, about intimate regrets and emotional connections that cross every boundary a married person should respect. I handed my phone directly to Elijah. He took it with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the first message, then scrolling. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like he might be sick. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Mason was on his feet now, his voice rising with panic. Elijah, don't listen to this. She's taking things completely out of context. You know how Arya gets about my friendship with Scarlett. She's always been jealous and now she's trying to destroy. How long? Elijah's voice cut through Mason's explanation like a blade through paper. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. The coldness in those 2 words silenced everything else in the room. He was still looking at my phone, still scrolling, but his question was directed at Scarlett with absolute precision. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear someone's watch ticking. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed. Her perfectly composed expression had cracked completely. Tears welled in her carefully made-up eyes. She tried the reflexive denial first, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mason and I are just close friends. We've always been close. There's nothing physical between us. Nothing inappropriate has actually happened. Elijah finally looked up from my phone. The expression on his face made even me take a step back. It wasn't just rage, though that was there. It was something colder, more devastating. Recognition. Vindication. Years of suppressed suspicion, finally given permission to surface. I didn't ask if you slept with him, Elijah said. His voice still controlled but carrying an undercurrent of fury that was more frightening than shouting. I asked how long you've been having an emotional affair with Mason while making me feel crazy for noticing. The parallel to my own experience was so perfect. We had both been living the same nightmare of gaslighting and manipulation, just from different angles in different marriages. Both told we were paranoid or insecure or unable to handle mature adult friendships. Both made to feel like the problem while our spouses maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of us. Scarlett's facade shattered completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Elijah, please. You're misunderstanding. We never meant for anything to. 3 years. Elijah's voice was flat, reading from the timestamps on my phone. According to these messages, this has been going on for at least 3 years. 3 years of secret lunches. 3 years of late-night conversations about regretting your life choices. 3 years of you telling him things you never told me. He scrolled further, his jaw tightening. Here's one from 8 months ago where Scarlett asks Mason if he ever thinks about what life would have been like if he'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And Mason responds that he thinks about it more than he probably should. Mason had found his voice again, but instead of apologizing, he went straight into damage control. He was standing now, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, pointing at me. Arya, you're destroying everything. This isn't what I meant when I asked you to apologize. You twisted what I asked you to do. You've taken private conversations completely out of context, and you're using them as weapons to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with desperation, trying to reframe my truth-telling as manipulation or revenge. He turned to Elijah, palms up. Look, Elijah, you have to understand. Scarlett and I have been close friends since college. We have history. Yes, maybe we talk more than typical friends. Maybe we're more emotionally connected than some people might think is appropriate, but nothing physical has ever happened. Arya's jealousy has blown a close friendship completely out of proportion. But Elijah wasn't listening. He was still scrolling through my phone, reading message after message where Mason and Scarlett crossed boundaries that no amount of explanation could justify. His expression grew colder, more closed. It says here, "You bought her a designer scarf for her birthday," Elijah said quietly, reading from the email receipts I'd included. $250. An expensive wine for her promotion. Flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Scarlett. "You told me those flowers were from a grateful client." Scarlett's tears were flowing freely now. "Elijah, I can explain how much." Elijah cut her off. "How much money has Mason spent on you over the past 3 years, while telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget?" Mason's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart in real time. The evidence spoke louder than his deflections. And Elijah was clearly someone who trusted facts over explanations. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress, picking up my purse. Mason continued his desperate explanations, but no one was listening. The time had come for me to leave. To walk away from the explosion I detonated and let it burn through whatever was left. I looked at Mason directly, meeting his eyes for what would probably be the last time with any kind of intimacy. "You demanded I apologize for speaking truth. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah. Done. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Mason, consider this my answer to that threat." Then I turned to Elijah. His expression was complex. Painful gratitude mixed with devastation. Anger at the betrayal mixed with relief at finally having proof that he wasn't crazy. "I've sent you copies of everything to your email address. All the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need to make informed decisions about your marriage. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Mason grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight, desperate. "You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this. Arya, please. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down and be reasonable." I pulled my arm free with more force than I'd intended, leaving red marks where his fingers had been. I met his eyes one final time. "No, Mason. You need to talk to your lawyer. Because I'm done being the understanding wife in a 3-person marriage where I was always the least important person." I walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, I heard Scarlett sobbing. Elijah's cold questions continued, his voice controlled, carrying that undercurrent of fury. Mason's increasingly desperate attempts to explain. But none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the cool October evening air and closed the door, muffling the sounds of their imploding marriages. The suburban street was quiet, peaceful. So completely at odds with the devastation I just left behind. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and called for a ride share. The driver arrived within 10 minutes. I climbed into the back seat and gave him my address. The entire 30-minute drive, I stared out the window at houses with lights on, families inside. People living their normal Saturday evenings, completely unaware that in one similar-looking house, 4 lives had just detonated. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for the devastation. I destroyed my own marriage, yes, but I'd also destroyed Scarlett and Elijah's. I'd humiliated Mason and Scarlett publicly. I'd handed Elijah information that would likely haunt him. But mostly I felt relieved. Like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me for so long. When the rideshare dropped me off, I walked up to our apartment, feeling like I was moving through a different world. I unlocked the door. Immediately the space felt different. Lighter. Less suffocating. Mason's things were everywhere. But they felt temporary now, artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on our couch in the quiet apartment, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. I sat there nursing my wine, waiting. Part of me wondered if Mason would come home at all that night, or if he'd stay at Scarlett's trying to salvage their fantasy. But a deeper instinct told me he'd come back, if only to try to control the narrative one more time. His key turned in the lock at 1:47 a.m. I'd been watching the clock, existing in that strange suspended state between exhaustion and hyper-awareness. The door opened. Mason walked in. And the man who entered our apartment looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left it just 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen, his hair messy, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like someone who'd aged a decade in an evening. He stood in the doorway staring at me. Then he walked into the living room. The look on his face. Devastation and fury, grief and rage, all competing for dominance. How could you do that? His voice was raw, scraped clean of its usual confident tone. How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship? Share private conversations that you had no right to see in the first place? I took another sip of wine. Said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Scarlett's house. Now it was Mason's turn to deal with consequences. He started pacing, jerky and agitated. You violated my privacy. You went through my personal files, read my private messages, and then you weaponized them to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship. This was the anger phase. Deny, deflect, attack, make the person who discovered the betrayal into the villain. I let him rant for 20 minutes, cycling through accusations about my jealousy, my insecurity, my inability to trust. Then he shifted strategies. Sat down, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, feigning vulnerability. Look, I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice softer, more reasonable. Maybe Scarlett and I got too close. Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries. But we can work through this, Arya. We can go to couples therapy. I'll put distance between myself and Scarlett. Whatever you need. Our marriage is worth fighting for. This was the bargaining phase. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. Mason, I'm filing for divorce. His face went through another rapid evolution. Shock first, then calculation, then manipulation. His features arranged themselves into wounded confusion. You're overreacting, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. You're emotional right now, understandably, but destroying our marriage over a friendship that you misinterpreted isn't the answer. You're letting your insecurities ruin something good. This is exactly what I was trying to help you work through. Even now, even caught with irrefutable evidence, Mason was trying to make this my failing, my insecurity, my misinterpretation, my inability to handle mature adult relationships. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word, closing and locking the door behind me. I heard him call after me, try the door handle, heard him pace for another hour. Around 2 a.m., I heard him finally settle on the couch, too exhausted to keep performing. The next morning he tried yet another approach. The wounded husband who just wanted to save his marriage. He called in sick, spent the entire day following me around, trying to initiate conversations about rebuilding trust. But I was done. Done fighting. Done explaining. Done accepting blame for other people's betrayals. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I detonated our lives at Scarlett's house, I called Victoria Brennan. I'd gotten her name from a colleague who spoke highly of her strategic approach to difficult divorces. Victoria was thorough, uncompromising, unsympathetic to spouses who tried to manipulate. Her office was downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was in her mid-50s, professionally dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct manner that was immediately reassuring. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. Showed her everything. The chronological screenshots, the credit card statements, the photos, the email receipts. Victoria reviewed each piece with focused intensity. When she finished, she sat back. Emotional affairs are harder to prove than physical ones in divorce proceedings, she said. But the documentation you've compiled is exceptionally comprehensive. This shows a clear pattern of deception spanning years, financial evidence of resources being diverted outside the marriage, and communication that crosses appropriate boundaries. We can absolutely use this. She laid out her strategy. File for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct. Push for a favorable settlement. He'll try to make you the villain, Victoria said. He'll claim you're jealous, vindictive, unable to handle his friendships. Don't let him. The evidence speaks for itself. I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks later, I received an email that surprised me. The sender was Elijah Pierce. Subject: Thank you. I opened it. Elijah explained that he had filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. Armed with the evidence I'd provided, he wrote about years of suspecting, but convincing himself he was paranoid, that Scarlett's friendship was innocent. My apology had given him both validation and proof. The evidence had made it impossible for Scarlett to deny. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime, carefully clarifying it wasn't anything romantic. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be the third priority in your own marriage. To be gaslit into doubting your own perceptions. I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Elijah looked different. The resigned exhaustion was gone, replaced by something more solid, more present. He looked like someone who'd finally stopped carrying a weight. Our conversation flowed easily. No need for pretense. We'd both already seen each other at our worst. Both been publicly humiliated. Both discovered our instincts had been right all along. Elijah told me about years of watching Scarlett's face light up when Mason called, of being told he was too sensitive, too jealous. It was like listening to my own experiences reflected back. We'd been living parallel nightmares. Through mutual friends, I later learned Mason and Scarlett did try to make a real relationship work after their divorces were set in motion. The predictability of it was almost funny. Once their connection was no longer forbidden or secret, once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of stolen emotional moments, the fantasy collapsed under the weight of mundane reality. They lasted exactly 4 months. Mutual friends reported growing tensions almost immediately. Scarlett struggled with Mason's finances. Mason discovered Scarlett's constant need for attention, which had seemed endearing from a distance, became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility. Their deep connection, conducted through texts and secret lunches, turned out to be mostly illusion. They broke up quietly. A sad fizzle. It proved what I'd suspected. What they had wasn't love. It was the thrill of an emotional affair, and the validation of being someone's secret priority. The knowledge gave me a strange sense of closure. Not satisfaction exactly, though there was vindication. More like confirmation that my instincts had been correct all along. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night, I sat in Victoria's office, signing the final divorce papers. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Victoria had negotiated a more favorable settlement than I'd expected. Mason agreed to split our savings, let me keep the apartment, and pay half my legal fees. Victoria suspected his unusual generosity stemmed from wanting to end proceedings quickly, before more details of his relationship with Scarlett became public record. His colleagues and family were already asking uncomfortable questions. He couldn't afford more scrutiny. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Arya Montgomery. No hyphenated name. No legal ties to Mason. Each signature felt like closing a door I'd been trying to shut for months. When I signed the last page, Victoria smiled. Congratulations, you're officially divorced. I shook her hand, gathered my paperwork and walked out. I'd expected this moment to feel heavier, sadder. I'd expected grief for the marriage I believed in, the future I'd planned. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd finally removed a heavy winter coat I'd been wearing for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. The afternoon sun seemed brighter as I walked to my car, warmer on my skin, carrying the kind of promise that comes with genuine new beginnings. My weekly coffee meetings with Elijah continued throughout the divorce. What started as mutual support between two people who'd survived similar betrayals gradually evolved into something more complicated and interesting. We met every Wednesday afternoon. At first, our conversations centered on processing trauma. We compared notes on gaslighting, traded stories about ignored red flags, found comfort in being understood by someone who'd lived through the same nightmare. But somewhere around the 3rd month, our conversation shifted. Less about past pain, more about present lives, future possibilities. Elijah mentioned a promotion, new responsibilities. I talked about a freelance design client who gave me creative freedom. We discovered shared interests. Old black and white films, slightly difficult hiking trails, quiet mornings. One Wednesday afternoon in early spring, Elijah suggested we meet for dinner instead of coffee. The way he asked made it clear this was a different kind of invitation. There's a new Italian place that opened downtown, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice I found endearing. I thought maybe we could try it together if you're interested. I looked at this quiet man who'd survived the same betrayal I had, who understood without explanation what it felt like to be gaslit and manipulated by someone you trusted. We were both gun-shy, both carrying damage that would take time to heal. But we built something honest between us over these months. A foundation based on truth, not illusion. On genuine understanding, not fantasy. I'd like that, I said. We took things slowly, both aware that trust rebuilds gradually after being thoroughly demolished. But the foundation felt different this time. Solid in ways my marriage to Mason never had been. I ran into Mason unexpectedly about 8 months after our divorce was finalized. Saturday afternoon, grocery store produce section. We both reached for the same bag of organic apples. Pulled back. Started to apologize. Recognized each other. Mason looked different. Older. More worn. New lines around his eyes, the kind that come from stress and difficult realizations. More gray hair. Lost weight, not in a healthy way. We stood there awkwardly. Arya, he said finally. How are you? I kept my answers simple, honest. I'm good. Working on some interesting design projects. Enjoying the apartment. Building a life that feels right. He nodded, something that might have been genuine happiness crossing his face. I'm glad you're doing well. He looked like he wanted to say something more significant, wrestling with words that wouldn't quite form. Finally he spoke quietly, almost too soft for me to hear. I made mistakes. A lot of them. I handled our marriage poorly. I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth about my relationship with Scarlett. The apology was real. I could hear that. But it came far too late. Some things can't be unsaid. Some damage can't be undone. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt nothing beyond that. No anger anymore, no hurt. Just recognition that this was a person I used to know, who taught me important lessons about boundaries and self-trust. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. There was a pause. Then I asked because some part of me was curious about how their story ended. How's Scarlett? Mason's expression closed off immediately. His face shutting down told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. We broke up months ago. Turns out what we had didn't translate well into an actual relationship. Once it wasn't secret anymore. He laughed without humor. I'm living in a studio apartment across town, working through my own process of figuring out who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining. We parted cordially after that. Both of us aware that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. They can only be acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us into whoever we become next. Today, I live in an apartment that no longer carries any trace of Mason or our marriage. I redecorated completely after the divorce, erasing visual reminders and replacing them with choices that reflect only my taste. The bookshelves hold novels I actually want to read. The walls feature artwork that speaks to me. The furniture is arranged for my comfort. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. It's the sound of a life reclaimed, of boundaries respected, of truth spoken without apology. Elijah and I are still taking things slow, still rebuilding trust that was demolished in our previous marriages. But what we're building feels different this time. Honest, based on respect, built between two people who understand the value of truth because we both paid the price for living in lies. I think about that night sometimes, that explosive apology that detonated multiple lives in Scarlett's carefully staged living room. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently, more privately, with less public devastation. But mostly, I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly. They need to be witnessed by everyone who's been affected by the lies. Mason wanted me to kneel and apologize for hurting Scarlett's feelings. I gave him exactly what he demanded. I just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding. Never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth. Because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie. Mason learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow for truth. I weaponized it. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of peace that comes after you finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth.